Hi guys, let's go watching. Just before that, subscribe and enjoy yourself. On a lovely rainbow morning, a fox was exploring the forest. But no matter how far she ran, the forest did not end. When she saw a burrow by a tree, she thought what a charming place it was and jumped into it. The fox gradually begins to realize that she is, indeed, Ionel de Rochim. Ionel de Rochim was a princess of the Rokim Empire. The emperor adored her, even though she was the last in line to the throne. It saddened him that she was born a girl, but she was not at all interested in power because the throne belonged to her brother, Agris de Roachim. She loved her family and was happy with them. Until one day she witnessed a chilling scene. A bloody father with a dagger in his chest slumped to the ground. Ionel rushed to him. Looking up, she saw her brother with blood-stained hands. She couldn't believe her eyes. Agris pulled the dagger from his father's body and swung it at his sister. Ionel collapsed to the ground, bleeding. She reached for him, calling out to her brother out of her last strength, to which he replied that she was disgusting. Ionel cried. The sound of the ocean. Ionel finds herself in some dark space, beginning to wonder if she is dead. The girl feels the walls. The space is stuffy, like being locked up. The walls start to crack. They collapse. It's light again. A pair of strangers appear before her eyes. They are happy for her awakening. Ionel is confused, not realizing who they are. Also, that tail, where did it come from? Instead of hands, cat feet. Suddenly, one of the strangers transforms into a huge fox. Ionel involuntarily lets out a scream, but this scream does not resemble a human scream at all, more like the cry of an animal. Realizing that they frighten her, the stranger reincarnates into a human. And finally, the girl begins to realize that she has died and been reborn into a divine beast. The castle becomes noisy as everyone discusses the news that the emperor died last night and Princess Ionel killed him. The commander, who is speechless when he hears this, falls into reminiscence. It was raining. He and Ionel were soaking under a tree. She asked him if he was thinking about what he wanted to do in the future. After all, in her eyes, Lord Abelode was no ordinary man. Ionel told him that she was sure he would be a hero whose fame would spread throughout the world, and she smiled wonderfully. A sunny forest dawn. Lenore, the fox in human form who has become Ionel's new father, is looking for a little fox sleeping in the bushes. The girl tried to deny the truth, being sure that it was just a dream. After a month, she accepted the new reality. But she still didn't understand why a divine beast. Long ago, divine beasts emerged from the shards of a god. Silver foxes, golden lions, blue whales, red wolves, white eagles, and green snakes. Divine beasts, who inherited the power of a god, could communicate with nature and spirits. They took care of heaven and earth, seas and rivers. But one day, disaster came. The beasts worked together to protect the continent, but no one has seen them since. And that's because they hid in a distant forest and never showed their faces again. The forest changed to a river. Her father carried Ionel on his back, moving extremely fast, which surprised her. Her parents always knew where she was, even though they let her go out alone, but still kept an eye on her. The egg from which Ionel hatched was half the size of a normal egg. She couldn't get out of her shell for 10 years. My parents named me Lucia. In addition, after the catastrophe, divine beasts lost their connection with spirits. But nevertheless, some part of divine powers remained. It can be used from birth, for example, to turn into a human. And if you have a talent for swordsmanship or magic, you can channel your energies in that direction. Lucia, however, perhaps because she remembers her past life, can't even speak, not only can't turn into a human. Ionel doesn't understand why her brother killed them. After all, the throne would never have passed to her anyway. She really wants to ask him why. But the vixen realizes that even if she meets him, she still won't be able to talk. Lenore stroked her cheek and took her in his arms, wondering if she was angry because he had prevented her from conquering the north. Had he hurt her sense of dignity? Of course not. They arrived at a huge cave. Lenore called out to Seriu, Lucia's mother. In the meantime, she was practicing her magic. The cave was very beautiful. Everything inside was covered in crystals that glowed brightly. Syria was worried when she saw them and asked if Lucia was asleep, to which Lenore replied that she was awake and tired. The vixen had run all the way to the northern border. Saria asks her daughter into her arms, but her father didn't refuse the hug either. Lucia was very uncomfortable, as she was still not used to their relationship. There was a letter on the table. Her mother had asked her father to read it. Lenore laughed, wondering how long Saria would be speaking so formally, for now they had Lucia and could communicate completely freely. It depressed him that everyone still thought he was her master. Father reads a letter that says that the Emperor of Roasham has been changed because the last one was killed. Lucia trembled. At the end of the letter it says that the murderer is Princess Ionel de Rokim. She killed the Emperor and then killed herself. Lucia is dumbfounded. She can't believe her ears. It was all Agris's plan. He killed her and their father, and then blamed it on her. All for the throne. The fox burst into tears. Mom and Dad started offering her treats, trying to calm her down. They were confused, not understanding her reaction. Her father wondered how to calm her down, as he was worried that she would soon collapse. Her mother gently wiped the tears from her face, took her in her arms and began to scratch her, telling her that everything was all right. But Lucia didn't stop sobbing. She was angry at this injustice. She wanted to tell everyone the truth. Someday she would tell the whole world what had happened. Opening her eyes, Lucia found that she had fallen asleep in the bed with her fox parents. Well, at least she felt much better now. She thought she had to find out what was going on in the Empire as soon as possible. The more she procrastinated, the harder it would be to uncover the truth. But Ionel couldn't get out of the forest alone. The fox wanted to speak, so she tried her best to concentrate and speak clearly. In her attempt to speak, she heard only an animal squeak. Reality is harsh, and determination alone can't change it. Meanwhile, the parents woke up. They were happy that the baby was cheerful and assumed that Lucia was hungry. The mother fed her daughter berries from her hands. Lenore flashed his magic, saying that he needed to excommunicate himself to the human world. If he didn't take action, Vermont might attack the forest. And besides, it wouldn't hurt to pay a visit to the imperial family. The silver fox is considered the patron saint of the land. So my father decided to see what was going on. Lucia jumped to the floor and ran to her father, clinging to his leg. After all, she might not have had another chance. She had to convince her father at any cost. But the mother suddenly shrieked negatively. Explaining that the human world is dangerous, the little girl is not ready yet. She can't let her go. Saria began to persuade her daughter that her father should go alone, and that they should prepare themselves and go later. Ionel was not confused. She chose her father as a victim, and with all her charm, eyes bulging, tears streaming, she stared at him. Lenore pondered. While he was pondering, Lucia was beginning to cry. Her father began to reassure her mother that she would be safe with him. But Saria emphasized that Lucia still hadn't gone through with the ceremony. Lenore objected, saying that the ceremony was in name only, just a bunch of divine beasts coming to gawk at their girl. Lenore hugged Saria, reassuring her not to worry, her trust in him directly proportional to Lucia's safety. Besides, the little girl was eager to go. Lenore took the baby in his arms with the suggestion of going to the human world. Lucia glowed. They were walking through the woods. The father carried the baby wrapped in a cloth. Because the mother was very worried, she swaddled her and gave them a plaid, cookies, and fruit. Before leaving for the human world, her father explained to the little girl that there are 3 immutable laws. First, you can't interfere with the course of history. Second, no one can know who you are. And finally, it is forbidden to fall in love with humans. If they find out that Lucia breaks any of the rules, she will be taken to the elders and locked away in the divine forest forever. Her father, though, thinks the taboos are silly, suggesting that they pretend to follow them so they don't get in trouble. To which the little girl squeaked approvingly. So they came to their home in the human world. A flag with the Ellerin family's coat of arms was flying on top of the castle. The sentry who saw the Duke approaching immediately ran to ring the bell. The gate opened and the guards came out to bow. More than 25 people came out to greet his lordship Duke El-Karan, which frightened the little girl. But her father held Lucia proudly and securely in his arms. Lenore Carl Elharan. The Duke was famous for studiously avoiding all kinds of banquets and receptions. He was so unsociable that he sometimes disregarded the emperor's orders, refusing to appear in the palace. Very few could boast of intimacy with him, but no one looked down on him. The Duke was master of the impregnable Idlebadur Mountains and the ice wall to the north. His skill with the sword was legendary, but they were not such legends. The Duke had indeed saved Rohim from barbarian invasion from the north. The rumors about him were truly contradictory. Some said he was a bloody murderer who reveled in violence. Some imagined him as an ugly old man, others as a beautiful young man. Few people knew him personally. The Duke was an enigma, a mystery shrouded in darkness. Rumors abounded about where he kept disappearing from the castle. He is, after all, a divine beast. They entered the palace, walking down a long hallway lined with antique furniture and candlesticks. The butler, Aidan, stood in their way, which made my father uneasy. After greeting the Duke, the butler reminded him that he had a lot of work to do, and it wouldn't hurt to get back to it. When they opened the door of the room, they were confronted by a huge mountain of papers. Lenore was disappointed at the butler's less than cordial reception and made an attempt to suggest a banquet, to which Aidan replied in the negative and pushed the Duke towards the table. The little girl was pacing the table, playing with papers. Father asked the butler if anything had happened while he was away. Aidan told the Duke that the barbarians had found a way through the wall. Lanner, a stern expression on his face, remarked that, whatever it was, they were just pathetic bugs. Daddy noticed the frightened baby. Taking her in his arms, he began to smile, saying that later they would go camping on them. He took the baby to his chambers to calm her down. Lucia had never thought Daddy could be like that. He was always sweet and caring. But now, Lucia dismissed those thoughts because no matter what kind of Duke he was still her favorite Daddy. Daddy's heart melted, and he was a little sad that he couldn't show off his beautiful baby girl to anyone. Daddy asked Lucia to stay here and sleep while he finished his business, and she responded with a joyful squeak. She began to lie down, as suddenly a flash of light, a portal appeared from which came out an unknown man. His necklace seemed familiar to the fox. Was it really the Archmage himself? But where did it come from? It appeared out of thin air. The Archmage headed for the Duke's chambers for some reason. Suddenly he notices the fox and was no less surprised than she was. He headed sharply towards the fox, trying to catch it. Tack grabbed it by the tail, lifting the little one upside down, examining and identifying Lucia as a hairball. The fox was frightened. The Archmage brute had been looking at himself for a long time, she thought. He held her in that position, examining and ridiculing her as if she were a common, useless ball of wool. The fox was outraged, for he himself had barged in on her and started insulting her, even though they didn't even know each other. The little girl's stomach rumbled. In spite of this sensitive situation, she was embarrassed. At this time, the Duke is discussing with the butler the incident with the barbarians. Aidan tells him that Vermont had been watching the wall during the Duke's absence, but when he left, the enemies took advantage and attacked. 20 people were wounded, many houses destroyed. It was still unclear why, but the barbarians had been much more active over the last month. Father had noticed that it had started happening just as Lucia was born. The butler was surprised, asking if he meant the little fox. The Duke smiled affirmatively and called her by her full, beautiful name, Lewin Stella. But her parents call her Lucia. Lenore ordered the butler to serve her faithfully. Aidan sweetly agreed that the name was charming. The Duke wonders what he has heard from Rohim's family. The butler presents 3 letters. Lenore takes them and smiles, noting how funny Rohim's family is. The butler emphasizes the need to respond immediately. As a sudden flash of light is seen outside the window, the father realizes it's time for him to do some parenting. Vermont presents the fox with a plate of various fruits. The mages, peering into the room tensely, try to stop the Archmage, reminding him that the fruits are for experiments, not to feed them to the fox. Rules are rules. The Archmage is no exception. An annoyed Vermont slams the door shut. Lucia looks around. There are even more books here than in the Imperial Library. She wonders if they are in the Tower of Mages, as those people looked like mages of the Rune Hilt order to her. Lucia greedily pounced on the food. She marveled at the presence of fruits from the divine forest in the castle. Did the wizards grow them? The little girl enjoys the fruit, thinking that the mages of Rune Hilt are really special. The Archmage stared at the fox cub. He exhaled with the words, "silly little thing." Despite his insults, he carefully wiped the fox's face. There was a knock at the door, announcing that Master Vermont had a visitor from Rokim. The Archmage was busy, but from behind the door a complaining voice could be heard begging to be admitted as he shouted that he would not leave until he had met the tower keeper in person. The fox was extremely surprised that the man who had stolen her from her father's chambers was of such a high position. Vermont asked what the man wanted, to which he was told that the man wanted to uncover the truth about the Emperor's death. The fox became agitated. To uncover the truth about the Emperor's death. The prince did his best to cover up the evidence and make Ionel look guilty. He covered his tracks and won the coveted throne. But he not only killed the princess, but also accused of his terrible crime. And now everyone in Rokim thinks the princess is the villain who killed her own father. It seems the guest from Rokim has a different version of what happened. It seems that at least someone believes that the princess is innocent. Lucia clutched at the Archmage's sleeve. Vermont wondered if the vixen was still hungry. At least Lucia had the appetite of a divine beast, he thought, for which he had to bite the Archmage's finger. Vermont looked at his hand in puzzlement. The fox stared aggressively at the Archmage, as if hinting that the rest of his fingers would be in danger if he did not receive such an important guest. A voice outside the door demanded a definitive answer. Vermont agreed to receive the guest, ordering the fox to stay here. The little girl tried to catch up with the Archmage, but the door slammed in front of her. Ionel sat on the floor with her ears drooping. Of course, it wasn't as bad as it could have been. At least there are still those who believe in the innocence of the princess. As long as at least one person believes in her, there's a chance to uncover the truth. The fox skipped merrily around the room and shrieked happily. Vermont entered the room where 3 guests were waiting for him. The guests were very surprised by the Archmage's appearance. Vermont thought irritably, if they thought he wouldn't come out to them, why did they keep waiting? The guests bow and thank the master for agreeing to meet with them. Vermont nobly sits down in a chair. The guests begin to introduce themselves, but suddenly the Archmage stops them. Here, their lineage and title are irrelevant. The Tower of Mages is sovereign, meaning it is not subject to any state. The master dismissed their thoughts that their title gave them any advantage. Vermont insists on getting to the heart of the matter. The guests want to uncover the truth about the past emperor's death. The master says the truth is already known. A mad princess killed her father in a fit and then killed herself. The guests jump up screaming that the princess would never do such a thing. She was framed. The Archmage did not hide his face twisted by the absurdity he had heard. That's why the guests from Rokim had come, to ask one of the Vermont mages for help, so they could prove the innocence of the princess. The Archmage stood up negatively and rushed for the exit. The master threw in a trace that they must offer something of equal value or be gone. The guests jumped up and shouted with glee the name and honor of Perrin Abelard. He paused, wondering how the commander of the Holy Order of Knights was a fool. Lord Abelard had said that the Archmage would agree if he knew he was willing to put even his own name on the line. To which Vermont agreed, providing the most experienced mage. Lucia sat sadly at the window. It was so high that she could see the clouds below. She thought that if she fell down, she would literally become a ball of wool. Just as she was suddenly bound by an unknown thread, screaming that she might have collapsed, the Archmage entered the tower. He snapped his fingers as he took the fox in his arms, and the office immediately glowed with a blue glow. They shifted. Opening their eyes, Lucia saw the sword held to Vermont's throat. Her father was standing in front of them, happily trying to tell the Archmage that it wouldn't hurt to give him a warning if he wanted to babysit his little sister. Vermont asked if it was necessary for a brother to ask permission to spend time with his sister. Lucia was very surprised that the Archmage was her brother. Though, come to think of it, they look alike. He has something of both parents in him. Conflict was brewing between the men. His father threatened that if Vermont were even a second late, he would smash his tower. His brother objected, emphasizing that a mage's tower was not a toy. As he looked at it, the fox thought that Vermont was exactly like his father. Daddy took the little girl in his arms and quietly asked her if her brother had ever hurt her. She tensed, remembering their acquaintance. Anyway, he fed her and brought her back safely. He was also worried that she might fall out of the window. Lanner hugged the crumb pitifully, to which his brother was indignant, since he had just taken to feeding her. Vermont suddenly asked his father if this hairball was the reason he was leaving the castle. His father was upset to hear his son call his sister, emphasizing that his mother would be very upset to hear it. Lucia squeaked affirmatively. Daddy gave the little girl to the butler, saying he'd be back soon. Lenore saddled his horse and offered his son a ride to discuss things in private. It was evening. When my brother returned from his walk, he was gloomy, surprised at what his father had been through. Daddy, however, happily grabbed the little girl. At breakfast, Vermont had to spread jam on the bread, which he did not like, stressing that it was exploitation of labor. His father, in turn, reminded him that it would not hurt to work off the money his son had borrowed to repair the tower. The son shrieked irritably that he had paid it all back, but his father hastened to remind him of the interest. Her father noticed Lucia's pity for her irritable brother and encouraged her to go and talk to him. Dad emphasized that they didn't even know each other's full names and introduced Luestella. Vixen walked over to her brother and put her paw to his face. Vermont took the baby by her front paws and introduced himself. Lucia squeaked happily. At first he seemed mean and rude to her. Although he can be arrogant at times, he's actually kind and caring. Vermont suddenly remembered and asked his father if he had heard anything about Perrin Abelard. Lucia's ears perked up in interest. Perrin Abelard. He had no title, no wealth, no one to follow him. When he joined the Order of Knights, he had only a sword. And while the beginning was far from promising, after only 3 months, everyone in the palace knew about him. And here's why: he won an unprecedented victory in a jousting tournament. He was congratulated by the emperor himself. He appointed him bodyguard to the princess, but not to the prince. He was incredibly talented. The emperor loved his daughter so much that he appointed him as her personal bodyguard. Perrin did his job flawlessly. No more, no less. Ianel wanted to get closer to him, trying to talk to him time after time. Once she casually offered her delicious candy, to which Abelard apologized and abruptly withdrew. The princess tried to be kind to her perfect bodyguard, but there was no way she could melt the ice between them. They stood on the same grass, breathed the same air, but they were never together. So Ianel didn't trust him, and apparently he didn't trust her. One day he came and told her that he was going to the front and asked for her consent. There was a war going on in the south, and he couldn't participate in it and be the princess's bodyguard at the same time. She decided that she would not interfere with him and gave her consent. Their uneasy relationship, which lasted a year, ended in nothing. Perrin won a series of resounding victories in the south and led the country to victory. He received the well-deserved title of Best Knight and became commander-in-chief of a holy order blessed by the archbishop himself. They never saw each other again. The princess only occasionally heard rumors about him. Vermont told her father of recent visitors who had come on Perrin's behalf, and that they claimed the princess was innocent. The fox was dumbfounded. He'd only been her bodyguard for a year. They couldn't even be called friends. Her father remembered that while he was in the forest, he'd heard rumors about him, rumors that Perrin had gone mad. Lenore noted that after Vermont's story, the rumors didn't seem so unfounded. No one in his right mind would throw his name around. The son speaks of an impending meeting with Abelard. Lucia was very upset that they were talking so intensely about Perrin, and she hadn't even had a chance to ask them if they were close to him. Vermont petted her, asking her father if it was too early to take her, since she had hatched a week ago. Lenore corrected his son a month ago. Vermont was very surprised, for the little girl was very young. The little fox snickered. She knows she's growing slowly, but there's no way she can affect it. His father informs him that he is going to the capital. The prince has granted him an audience. Vermont insists on going with his father. Besides, he promised to send one of the strongest mages to Perrin. But is there any mage in the tower stronger than Vermont? The trip to the imperial palace was a week away. In the meantime, Lenore decided to return to his duties as duke. The butler again brought a mountain of documents that filled the table. The duke really hoped it was a joke, to which Aiden replied in the negative. It was all that had accumulated during his absence. Papa asked Lucia to hold her paw. The butler noticed what an extraordinary coloring Lenore's daughter had. The proud father added that he had never seen such a thing in divine beasts. The vixen tensed. Aiden was human. What about the rules? The father, seeing his daughter's consternation, began to reassure her, explaining that he was on the border of two worlds and there was no need to hide from him. Papa would have loved to elaborate, but the butler was insistent on keeping his mind on his work. Lenore laughed, the butler but shut the Duke's own mouth and set to work. Lucia was eager to know what this border was, but she didn't want to distract them. 7 hours later. Father absorbed in his work. 12 hours later. The father is still at work. The little girl is running out of patience. He keeps sitting there writing and writing and writing, not even a word. Daddy hugged his daughter, noticing how tired she was, and suggested that she take a walk and look around the palace. It was time to explore all the secret corners. The palace of the princess of the Empire of Roachim. The princess palace is right across from the emperor's palace, and both were left without masters. Only a month ago, the princess and the emperor were visiting each other in the long corridors. Agris couldn't believe that only a month ago, a brutal murder had taken place here. Because of that incident, the nobles had decided to leave the imperial palace. No one wanted to live near the crime scene, except... The prince enters the room where he is greeted by a red-haired princess who was very happy to see him and was looking forward to their meeting. The princess says she will live here from tomorrow. She praises the magnificent palace and is happy that her mistress is dead, because now she will take her place. Sitting in the kitchen, Lucia is confused by the attention of the cook and the maid offering her cookies straight from the oven. Another kitchen worker runs up, holding milk in his hands. A while ago. The little girl was running around, exploring the palace, looking in every corner, but she was attracted by an aroma. It seemed to be baking bread for dinner. It smells like apples, too. What a sweet aroma. While the fox was sniffing around, the cook, not noticing it, almost stepped on its tail, got scared and fell down. The kitchen workers were surprised to see the fox here. Suddenly they recall the Duke's words that he treats this fox cub as his own daughter and orders to treat her well. Now, Lucia eats the pies. She's not hungry, of course, but how can she resist when everything is fresh and looks and smells so wonderful? Suddenly, a familiar song is heard. Lucia stares intently at where it could have come from. The kitchen worker fails to hold the pot of soup, and it flies straight towards the little girl. The kitchen staff is terrified. Lucia is even more terrified, and some unknown barrier protected the fox. No one realized how it happened. Everyone rushed worriedly to her. The man who couldn't hold the pot begged for forgiveness. The little girl was puzzled. If her powers had manifested, no, she couldn't even turn into a human. Some unknown force has protected her. A week later, father and son are going to the palace. Lucia wasn't planned to be taken along, of course, so she took control of the situation and deftly clung to her father's back. But no sooner had Daddy left the room than Lucia was discovered by her brother. Daddy turned around and glowered, saying he couldn't leave her behind. My dear brother pointed out that there was a risk of the fox catching fleas in the capital. His father suggested turning her into a human as his son could do it. Distorting his face in indignation, his brother exhaled and proceeded to work his magic. The room shone with a bright blue light, and Lucia clung to her father, but couldn't take her eyes off her brother. Suddenly, blue threads wrapped around her body and lifted her up. The Archmage cast a spell. The threads wrapped around the body so tightly that nothing could be seen beyond them. The little girl opened her eyes. Her surprised brother was standing in front of her, saying that she was growing so slowly that she was still a baby. When the spell is broken, she will return to her normal form. The baby, realizing her human body, attempted to speak, but only made a cute little baby voice. His father claimed that Lucia had called him Dad, while his brother was pretty sure she had said bro. A heavy atmosphere hung, and only Lucia realized that she had merely asked if she was a baby. At last, the baby was human, but she felt no difference, still as helpless as ever. The quarrel between the men grew, and the child roared. The bright sun illuminated the beautiful palace. The garden was fragrant with various flowers and trees. The father proudly carried the little girl in his arms. The son asked if he wanted to introduce her as his daughter, to which he received a positive answer. Lucia was special to him. Divine beasts are independent by nature. They leave their parents early and occupy their own territory. Nor is it unusual to venture into human lands. My father left his parents when he was only a year old. But Lucia was different. It's been a month and she hasn't grown a bit. If she couldn't stand up for herself, she'd need a bodyguard. Duke Elharan. The guard notifies the guests that His Highness the Prince is expecting them in the drawing room. The father looked back, handed the little girl to his son, and headed out to meet her. Lucia roared. She hadn't come all this way to stay outside the door. Vermont moved closer to the child's ear and hinted that if she continued to act like this, she would turn into a handful of dust. His brother looked very convincing, and it was hard not to agree. To pass the time waiting for her father, Vermont asked the maid to take them to the garden. To pass the time waiting for her father, Vermont asked the maid to take them to the garden. Brother plucked a rose, showing his sister how beautiful the flowers were, for roses were rare in the north, but in the imperial garden they grew at every turn. Hiding behind the bushes, his brother was comforting his little sister. He started to do magic. Blue balls swirled around and they became invisible. Vermont slipped through the guards. The little girl glanced at her brother, hoping he had some plans. They headed for the princess's palace. As they entered the palace courtyard, they heard a woman's scream, which caught their attention. The princess was furiously scolding the maid, Marian, as the tea was too hot. Foxy recognized the princess. Her name was Bianca. The red-haired princess waved her hand and immediately another maid pounced on Marian. Mom died of malaria a month after Ianel was born. Her father kept her safe. There was a time when she was left all alone. However, the maids took care of her. They filled the void in the girl's life, becoming her friends, her family. They were important to the princess. Ianel knew that no one would treat them like she did, but Bianca's treatment and educational measures were just monstrous. The child sobbed bitterly. She wanted it to stop so badly. For some unknown reason, the spell suddenly dissipated, and the human baby turned into a fox. A melody sounded, just as it had then in the kitchen, and the sky lit up with a bright pink flash that everyone in the palace saw. The sunny weather has been replaced by an unexpected downpour. It seems that storm clouds will soon cover the whole country. Marian lay on the ground. The fox rushed to her, tugging at her clothes. It tried to drag her to a dry place, but the little girl only tore off a scrap of cloth. Lucia covered the maid's face with her paws, trying to shield her from the rain. Suddenly, someone covered them with a cloak. The little girl turned around, seeing a tall, dark-haired man in front of her. He was the commander of the Holy Order of Knights, Perrin Abelard. The maid began to dissolve. Lucia was frightened. Her brother calmed her sister, letting her know she would be taken care of. Magical threads wrapped around the little girl and pulled her to her brother. He hugged her and began to wipe her. Vermont turned his gaze to Perrin, wondering what he was doing here. The Lord had come by order of the prince. The Archmage recalled the recent guests who had come on his behalf. Perrin confirmed that he had indeed sent them to the Mage Tower. Vermont was furious that a divine beast would throw his name around so easily. The little girl was frightened and wondered if names had any special meaning to divine beasts. And then she began to realize what she had just heard. Perrin is a divine beast. That explained why father and brother talked about him so much. They are all divine beasts. That's why they know each other so well. Lord stared at the little girl. She tensed, thinking he recognized her. Just as he wanted to speak, the brother introduced his sister. Vermont was angry that Perrin didn't show up at all in the divine forest, didn't even know that someone had been born. But as it was, he would fulfill his request as promised. Holding the baby girl, with the help of magic, they vanished into thin air. The guard informs Sir Abelard that His Majesty is ready to receive him. The children returned to Lenore as soon as the audience was over and went to see the capital. Vermont sent Marian to the Duke's palace where she was treated. The little girl was able to meet her at last. The maid was very grateful to his lordship. Marian introduces herself by saying she serves in the imperial palace. She was Princess Ianel's nanny. Her hands are covered in band-aids and bandages, her face covered in abrasions. Lenore apologizes for having to disturb her in such a state, but he wants Marian to tell him what Princess Ianel was like. At breakfast, the little girl admired the special cookies made by Duke Elharan. It was in the shape of divine beasts. Father was telling how Marian had said yesterday that the princess had been slandered. Ionel would never hurt anyone, and certainly wouldn't run away from responsibility. She had a kind disposition and a big heart. She was special. Marian had never met anyone like her. When she heard this, the little girl cried. Father remarked that the princess treated the servants well. The child raised her head proudly. The meeting with the prince was rather strange. He said, "Kneel and submit to him," of course by more flattering speeches. The father chose to express only the essence of the prince's address. The news shocked the children. His father thought that if he refused, the prince would eat him alive. So he smiled and left without answering. Vermont was burning with anger. The Ellerons have remained neutral for generations. The prince knows this, of course, and has tried to sway the duke to his side after all. He must be up to something. It seems the calm before the storm is about to end. Her father is thinking it's time to call Syria, Ionel's current mom, and also to bring Hikon. He asked his father why the mad dog was here, to which he replied that he was already in the capital. Vermont jumped up from his seat, slapping his hand on the table. He was adamantly against it. If they wanted a bright future for Lucia, they couldn't let this ignoramus anywhere near her. Lucia became curious. Her father took her gently in his arms and told her to ignore the fact that her brother didn't listen to Dad, that she shouldn't take an example from him. Brother and Lucia went into town. He was in a hurry, thinking he had to be on the lookout in case some sly fox decided to trick them. His brother wasn't going to waste his precious time on him, so with the help of magic, they moved to the roof, so that they could get everything sorted out and go home. Just as Papa said, Hikon is in the capital. He's escorting foreign nobles to the Great Temple. Erencia, the holy land where the Great Temple is located, borders the capital of Roahim. The spell should lead them to him. It was pointing in the opposite direction of Erencia, which surprised Vermont. Reaching the place the spell pointed to, Vermont and the baby saw the carnage, the mercenaries fighting the fiends. His brother resented what the dog was doing and covered the child's eyes. Vermont noticed a familiar emblem lying on the floor, and in the midst of the commotion, he deftly pulled it to himself. It was clearly the property of a nobleman. The fight is over. The mercenaries take the children out, pointing out that all the kidnapped children are here. The captain stretches and orders them to clean up while he takes the money and returns. Seems to know where he went, escorted him where he needed to go, and took on another job. Vermont decided to follow him. A little later, Captain comes to an abandoned house. Well, there's definitely some illegal activity going on in a place like this. Turning around, he asked if Vermont had decided to brighten his day and fight him, to which the brother exhaled and graciously came down from the roof with his feet into the captain's face, thereby knocking him to the ground and asking if he really still wanted to fight. The captain was further annoyed by the encounter, but he noticed the child and wondered if Vermont had time to marry and have a child. Hikon picked up the little girl, saying since she was Vermont's sister, she was his sister too. Lucia was completely confused. Lucia's second brother is the captain of the continent's famous, invincible mercenary army. The girl wondered if all the children of Lenore and Syria were so successful in life. Brother, number 2, hugged the little girl, saying she looked like a fox, but the fur was strange, silver pink. Vermont hurried his brother as his father was waiting, but he refused to leave without payment. While waiting for the customer, Hikon played with his sister, much to Vermont's annoyance, but he refused to give up the child, enraptured by her charms. Just as suddenly, a man with his face covered by a hood walked in. Hikon greeted him, calling him Your Eminence. The girl was dumbfounded. As a princess, she rarely saw the bishop. He appeared only at the most important celebrations. The bishop demanded proof that the children were saved. Examining it, Vermont noticed a brooch with the same emblem as he had seen earlier. Hikon reported the slave traders dead, then handed the bishop what he asked for, a piece of paper. The man grabbed it, read it, and crumpled it. The commander asked the clergyman if he wondered if the children were all right, to which he replied, straining a smile, that he had no doubt they were treating them well. The bishop was about to say goodbye when Vermont stopped him. He gave the child to his brother and went to the clergyman. He wondered how the slave traders got a pass to the Great Temple and why the bishop would turn to mercenaries. The man waved him off, emphasizing that he was too curious to be a mercenary. Vermont apologized but continued. He thought the bishop had something to do with the slave trade. The man covered the brooch with his hand. He didn't care about the children. He just wanted to cover his tracks. The bishop silently turned around, and with a wave of his hand, knights began to come out from all sides. In parting, the man added that they would die today because of their curiosity. Vermont said that if God had known what the temple had become, he would have inflicted the punishment of heaven upon them, to which the bishop cried out that he was following the will of God. He had appeared to him. He had seen him. Vermont tried to find a reasonable and safe way out of the situation, and then gave the command of FAS. Hikon drew his sword and rushed into battle. The knights fell one by one. The bishop tried to escape, but Vermont stopped him with his magic. Hikon asked the bishop to remind him what would happen when there was no room for God in the temple. God will send a great punishment. Even though Hikon had killed the bishop and the knights of the Holy Order, he was relieved. Although his brother was clearly not happy about it, if it weren't for his curiosity, Hikon would have taken the money and left. Vermont and Lucia returned home, where a happily smiling father was waiting for them. His father pretended not to understand, even though he knew how things would turn out. No matter how powerful and famous a mercenary is, he is just a mercenary. If he decides to accuse the bishop of slave trade, even if he is already dead, everyone will side with the temple. It's easier to accuse the mercenaries. You can't defame the honor of the temple. When Ianelle was a princess, she judged only by appearances and had no idea what they were really like. If she hadn't been reborn, she never would have known. But something bothered Vermont even more. The bishop seemed to be possessed by a divine beast. He had almost revealed himself, but the mad dog had killed him before. Hikon promised to arrive when he was done with his business. The Elharan family is having a banquet. The future duchess must be introduced to everyone. Vermont asks his father if he's sure, to which his father replies, "War is coming." Neither the prince nor the bishop would just reveal their plans. Someone else is behind them, and he's encroaching on the Silver Fox's domain. Lenore will not let this go. They're in for a big fight. Daddy smiled and said, touching the little girl's face, "We have nothing to be afraid of." A few days later, Duke Elharan sent out an invitation to a banquet for all the nobles of the Roachim Empire to be held at his residence. The invitation said in big letters, "A banquet in honor of the young duchess, the daughter of the Duke of Elharan." Lucia was trying on dresses. The child was exhausted. It was the 10th dress. She waited for the servants to decide. And here it was, cute even by the standards of the capital. Suddenly Aiden ordered her to carry the next dress. Not even in her previous life had she been bullied like this. And the baby screamed. Aiden exhaled and called a break. The butler brought sweets and lemonade. Lucia began to eat. She was embarrassed that he was just standing there watching her eat. The little girl tried to offer Aiden a cookie. Aiden took a seat next to him, saying that Lady Lucia was not only a divine beast, but also divinely sweet. An agitated maid entered, informing him that the dress the Duchess had ordered had been taken. Aiden swore on his name that he would return the dress. And after such a fiery speech, he returned empty-handed, locked himself in his room, and refused to come out. The father listened to the maid, and seeing his daughter's indignation, went in search of him. Aiden's memories. Walking down the street, he picked up an apple that a woman had dropped. As he tried to give it to her, she screamed. People began to turn around, and some man threw a rock at him with a cry of monster. Aiden's skin was partially covered with snakeskin. There was a knock at Aiden's door. When he opened it, he saw the little girl with the Duke. He said they'd explained everything to him. Someone had stolen Saria's dress right out of the atelier. The butler went to sort things out, and then hiding in the room, Lenore asked what was wrong. Aiden stammered. He replied that he had met someone he knew, and the Duke called him to come with him. Aiden was disturbed by his behavior, to which he replied that he was going to return his wife's dress and butler's honor. They went to Gavrian's atelier. This place sells the finest dresses on the entire continent. The outfits designed by Gavrian are popular both within and outside the empire. It is he who determines the direction of fashion. However, Gavrian doesn't care about fame or money. He only creates when inspiration strikes. Knowledge is measured not only by power or wealth, but also by the number of Gavrian outfits. Father entered the atelier. When he saw this handsome, statuesque man, the women at the atelier bustled about. They asked what kind of dress he would like, to which the Duke replied a yellow silk one with lace and a large neckline on the chest. The girls panicked. Lanor ordered Gavrian to be called and sat down. The little girl in Aiden's arms watched everyone shaking with fear. She noticed one of the workers looking at her with contempt. No, not at her, at Aiden. Lenore turned to this employee, since he's standing there staring, probably wanting to tell him where the dress went. It was taken by the princess's maid. While they were all working hard, she just took the dress. He didn't even have time to say it was for the Duchess. The guy was lying. Even the little girl could tell. Suddenly, a maid came in, saying that the dress needed to be altered. It didn't fit properly. Lanor stood up and took the box with Saria's dress from her. The Duke asked me to tell Princess Bianca that the dress he ordered was for his wife. Her Highness liked it so much. The maid asked if the Duke would agree to give it to the princess. He is a duke, of course, but he wouldn't dare oppose a member of the imperial family. The maid continued to insist. Lucia was very worried. She wanted the maid to stop as she was afraid her father might have a bloodbath in broad daylight. Lenore, recognizing that the princess had tried it on, exhaled and said he would have to order a new one, and with a nonchalant look, he tore the dress to shreds. Everyone stared at him in horror. And the Duke said he wouldn't let his wife walk around in some rags because that's not right. The forest of divine beasts is always quiet and peaceful. A month after Lucia's birth, Lenore's only problem was finding the escaped baby girl. But things are different in the human world. The imperial family is always scheming, and because of the constant barbarian raids, you have to be on guard all the time. On top of that, Lenore had a lot of small problems, which was unpleasant in itself. He always took an unconventional approach to solving problems. Lenore wasn't the kind of man who wouldn't follow orders. But this was too much. The maid threatens the Count in anger, saying if the prince finds out, he will regret what he has done. The Count agrees, but as he comes closer, he asks her what she thinks is in store for her for stealing the Count's wife's dress. The maid hurriedly leaves. Gavrian comes out to the guests. The women workers rush to him in tears. He asks what happened. Lenore activates his spell and apologizes for the commotion. He ordered a dress, and it turns out to have already been worn. Lenore can't let his wife wear a worn dress, nor can he let anyone else wear it. But now she had nothing to wear to the banquet. He went on with the sweetest charisma, which knocked everyone off balance. He realized time was short, but begged me to sew another one. Gavrian was simply mesmerized by him. His eyes shining, he had no chance to refuse. With the words, "Pay what you wish," Lanor handed over a blank check. Gavrian wrote the amount, but the Duke did not like it, and he corrected something. Everyone present was shocked by what they saw. To the 10 million, Lenore added 2 zeros. It was a mind-boggling sum for one single dress. Not even the imperial family can afford such a thing. And that was the Duke's farewell. As they were leaving, they were discussing how well it went, when suddenly that lying guy blurted out, "Monster." And they stopped. The Duke said loudly and distinctly that the staff didn't seem to be trained in manners at all. There was nothing more for them to do here. The Earl hollered. Aiden was embarrassed. The girl scolded the guy for his attitude toward his customers. Lucia was angry. The type first says all sorts of nasty things and now stares at them. If she had been older, she would have kicked him so hard. As they were getting into the carriage, they heard a noise, the same mysterious melody playing, and suddenly the rascal fell unconscious. Over breakfast, the little girl pondered what that strange tune was. This time, she heard something that sounded like laughter. A servant came in, notifying his lordship of Gavrian's arrival. Gavrian was very glad to see him. Gavrian apologized for the incident with the dress, and he was sorry to have to find a replacement for it. But he had come up with a new dress not only for the Duchess, as had been agreed upon, but also for the young lady. He had come to discuss a few designs. Lucia rejoiced. She loved Gavrian with all her heart, who would free her from this fitting hell. Savior! It's not like Gavrian doesn't make children's clothes, but he decided to make a dress especially for the little countess. There's no reason not to. Lucia saw the worried butler. When they got home, Aiden sat as if nothing had happened. His face showed no emotion at all. She didn't know anything about his past, but she knew how much he'd been hurt by those words. And now that the moment had flown away like a butterfly. When it was time for a snack, the mask of equanimity fell away. Aiden cried. He said he wasn't worthy to serve Duke Elcaran. when in fact it's all about Aiden alone. The little girl was dumbfounded. He manages to cope with the willful gods who don't want to listen to anyone, and only Aiden can do it all. Aiden added that he'd never deserved to be his lordship's butler. Such a monster had no place in this world. Lucia hadn't expected to hear that. The little girl screamed and crawled over to the butler. She hugged Aiden, trying to tell him he wasn't a monster. Lucia couldn't express half of what she wanted to say, but still, when she gave him the cookies, she was sure he understood. Foxy didn't know what had happened between them, but even if Aiden had done something bad, that was no reason to gossip behind his back. She wondered if Aiden had done something monstrous. Dad was a good judge of character. He trusted Aiden, and so did Lucia. Time went on and on. Finally, the day came when Mom finished preparing for Lucia's ceremony. She was about to arrive. Divine beasts always perform this ceremony when someone is born. It is an important moment in the life of every beast. So Mom stayed in the woods to get everything ready. The petals swirled and blazed. Syria emerged from the circle. Syria rushed to Lucia, taking her gently in her arms. Daddy was forgotten, and he begged into their arms. Mistress tried on the dress. She was marvelous. That's what happens when a genius gets the job done. Suddenly, my father ordered me to carry the following. It's the wrong color. It doesn't bring out Sari's charm. The next one doesn't match Lucia's dress. The next one, he just doesn't like it. Syria's patience was at an end. As soon as she wanted to say something, Lenore suggested she pick out some jewelry for Lucia. She hadn't chosen a dress for herself as carefully as she'd chosen Lucia's jewelry. Mom took a massive chain with a huge stone. Dad smiled, looking at the situation. He took out a thin chain with a small rose from the box and offered it to her. Like a true sly fox, Dad said his wife's choice was certainly beautiful, but a bit heavy-handed for Lucia. The baby fell asleep, and her mother told her that while she was preparing for the ceremony, the elders came. It was a surprise to her father. Father understood that it was strange to delay the ceremony, but not so much that the elders would come. Syria said that Vasila had returned. Father was surprised. He wouldn't have moved without a reason. Perhaps he found out that Lucia had turned back into a fox. Vermont said that for some reason his magic had dissipated, and when Lucia turned, it immediately rained. Mom pointed out that Lucia was not like them. She was special. Lucia was born into a family of a silver fox and a red she-wolf. Usually in such a case, the children belong to only one of the species. Each of the divine beasts has characteristics that are not unique to any species. Lucia is a silver fox, but she has pink ears and tail. If Lucia does belong to a separate species, something could happen that Lenore and Syria would never want to happen. The little girl woke up, stretched with all her legs. Her father was lying next to her. Daddy's a handsome man, but we have to get ready for the banquet. Vermont entered their chambers in search of a ball of wool and began the spell to turn Lucia into a human. Father changed his clothes. Vermont decided to stay in his robe, and they went to the banquet. The palace is exquisitely decorated. The guests gather and discuss the luxury and the count surrounding them. The door swung open and the butler announced the arrival of the Duke and Duchess of Elharan. They looked amazing. The guests were shocked by their beauty and by the fact that the Duke turned out not to be a scary old man. Someone whispered that compared to the Duke, the Duchess was some kind of simpleton. They heard them because their hearing was better than that of humans. Mom would not forgive those who disrespected her. Lucia had no idea what would happen if she got angry. The guests murmured, and two men entered the hall. The tower keeper and the captain of the mercenaries, Hikon, the mad dog. A whisper went around. People were saying that of course there were rumors that the Duke had hired guards for his daughter. But who would have thought that the Runhild wizard and the mad dog would be hers? Now the young Duchess is 100 paces away. The Duke introduces the arriving guests. Mr. Vermont and Mr. Hikon have agreed to honor them with their presence at Lou and Stella's birthday party, also adding that these are not all the guests of the evening. Others, no less highly honored, will be arriving soon. Trumpets sounded, signaling the arrival of new guests. The butler introduces His Highness Crown Prince Agris de Roachim and Her Highness Princess Bianca. The nobles greeted each other. The prince asked to be forgiven for their tardiness. He addressed the Duchess, saying that he was glad to finally meet her in person. The Duchess introduced herself in the proper manner. Agris noticed the child in Syria's hands and turned to her, saying how pleased he was to meet her. Ianel remembered the night he had killed her and their father, and turned defiantly away from the prince. He suggested to the parents that if they would allow it, he would like to be their daughter's godfather. The guests were amazed. It would be an incredible honor for any noble family if the prince himself, the future emperor, offered to be godfather to their children. But the imperial family and Duke Eleron are not that close. In other words, this proposal is an attempt to mend their relationship. How ironic, the villain who killed Ianel now claims to be the godfather. His mother turns him down, saying they've already chosen a godfather for their daughter. The father and the prince stepped back to talk. The girls tried to approach Saria to get to know her better, praising her outfit and her daughter. They apologized for disturbing them. The little girl wondered, they want to talk to Saria but are afraid because she seems aloof and arrogant, and Vermont and Haikon aren't exactly friendly. In whispers, the girls argued for something else to say. Saria smiled and thanked them, telling them that their lovely dresses, no worse for wear than hers. The guest asked what the young duchess's name was. Lucia wanted to answer herself, so she proudly introduced herself as Usha. Lucia hid in embarrassment. Vermont and Haikon turned away, trying to contain their laughter. The girls were glowing, looking at the cutest creature. Princess Bianca Sarayant Rochim came over to greet them and introduce herself, and offered to chat. Her father, the Duke of Sarayant, really wanted to go to the banquet, but unfortunately is not feeling well. She asked the Duchess if she had a middle name. Bianca thought, she is the only daughter of the Duke, the companion of the Crown Prince, the future Empress. The Duchess must be ashamed in front of her splendor. To which Saria coldly replied, no. The princess suggested that she needed to apologize, to which the Duchess replied that she wasn't hurt in the slightest. She tried to humiliate her mom with her title, but it didn't work. As suddenly, the lady the princess approached with started to put her glass down. Lucia didn't want her mom's dress to be ruined and reached out in an attempt to stop her. The girl spilled champagne on the girl and she shrieked, which drew the attention of those present to the situation. The brothers rushed to the rescue. Haikon grabbed the bottle, broke it, and held the shard against the culprit, asking if she wished to die. The princess stood up for the lady, saying that Lady Azarel had simply misstep and expected an apology from Saria for her subordinate's behavior. The Duchess stopped her son, saying that they wanted to ruin her dress, but they doused her girl. You can't expect an apology from them. He added that the young Duchess would not soon be able to appear in high society. The princess was offended and rushed away. Lenore approached, saying to do with the princess as she wishes, as parents should be responsible for their children. The mother gave her daughter to her brother and turned to the guests to ignore them and enjoy the banquet. Lucia felt hot, like she was being torn from the inside out. Haikon was worried. A flash of light and the child turned foxy. Haikon turned to his brother, but he wasn't around. At that time, Vermont was watching an unknown burning palace. I had to find my brother. Haikon hid the little girl on the terrace, telling her to stay put, he'd be back soon. The banquet is in full swing. Lucia is hiding in the corner of the terrace. Surely no one would come this way. Suddenly, looking for a flash of light, Agris entered. He saw a small silver fox, to which he was very surprised. The little fox became nervous. Suddenly, an unknown voice ordered her to run away. Lucia was at a loss. There was nowhere to run to. A voice showed her the way. Agris held out his hand to the fox, and she burst into tears. The girl was tired. She stopped hoping that she had managed to get away, but the voice screamed trouble. Terrible trouble. He is here. Scary. How scary. She turned around and saw Perrin Abelard. She wanted to ask him for help, but she remembered how he had protected her in her past life. But other than that, he had never helped anyone. Footsteps were heard. Agris was catching up with her. Lucia, panicked, threw herself on Perrin's back, hiding under his cloak. They greeted each other, and Agris asked if he had seen the silver beast. He answered in the negative. Agris started talking about Princess Ianel. He said how much it pained him to think of her, because she had been so kind and sweet until she went mad. Adding that it was all his fault, he should have paid more attention to her, taken better care of her, then things might have been different. He was a bad brother, and asked what Sir Abelode thought of it. But he only replied that he had nothing to say. Only one man knew the answer. Her Highness, only she can tell us what happened. Abelode's first memory. This could have been a real disaster. born without parents, not belonging to any of the divine beasts. The elders said that with another cataclysm, even their best knights might not be able to handle it. But the divine beasts protested. They wouldn't let them kill an innocent child. Nothing terrible had happened yet. These events sowed discord. Opinions were divided. Abelard remembered everything as if it had happened yesterday. In the end, they decided to let him live. But there were those who still feared the very fact of his existence. For safety's sake, they put him in chains. After learning to turn into a human, he left the forest of divine beasts and traveled to the human world. With no home or family, he only wandered aimlessly. So he decided to join the emperor's ranks, to see what he could accomplish. A spontaneous decision, a desire to relieve boredom and brighten up the gray of everyday life. That's how he became the princess's bodyguard. When they first met, she was 16. At first glance, she was just an ordinary princess, but there was still something that made her different. She cared for her subjects. Everyone around her loved Enl. Her sincerity could not leave anyone indifferent. She infected everyone with her ringing laughter. She was as kind to Peyrin as to the others, and while she annoyed Peyrin, he wanted more of her attention for himself than for the rest of them. Sometimes he felt uncomfortable with his feelings. He was happy with life and work. But one day they were caught in a downpour, and the princess said she was sure Abalode would become a hero, his name spreading across the continent. Of course, everyone will know the one who will cause the disaster, he thought. The princess was beautiful, her smile mesmerizing. That's when he started to feel something strange. Nothing seemed to have changed, but every day it was like he was getting stupider. It seemed to Abelard that if he distanced himself from her, the feeling would disappear. So he did, making his intentions clear. He was going to the front. Southern front line, the castle's on fire. He went to war to be away from the princess. It seemed there was no time to think of the princess. All around him was death. In the heat of the chaos of battle, he tried to forget the one thing that made his heart flutter. But how could he control it? Amidst the dust, the fire that engulfed the field as he swung his sword, as someone's life was in the balance, he remembered her. He must have gone mad. He must not see the princess, he thought, as he went to the front, but even away from her, he could not forget her. No matter how hard he tried to deny the truth, he finally had to accept it. He'd never experienced anything like this before, but he was determined to end this war. That way, he'll earn everyone's respect, become a hero just like she said, and return to the palace. Maybe then she'll smile at him again. He won victory after victory. The high priest, impressed by his dedication, appointed Abelard captain of the knights. After all, he had become a hero, famous throughout the continent. I'm sure the princess couldn't have imagined the effect her words would have on him. He wondered what she would say now, what she would wish for, just to see her smile again. But the princess never knew what he had become. When he returned, she was dead. After Abelard's answer, Agris left. He pulled the fox from under his cloak and asked if the Duke had warned him not to let people see him. Lucia worriedly remembered the 3 rules of divine beasts. Abelard promised to return her to her parents. Suddenly, the worried brothers ran up to them. Hikan had taken the little girl from the Lord, thinking he had kidnapped her. Lucia rebelled, but she couldn't explain everything. Vermont demanded an explanation. Abelard told about the prince. Vermin didn't understand how that could happen twice. Hikan had kindly suggested that if the character was crappy, the magic wasn't very good either. Abelard wondered if the little girl still could not turn into a human. The brothers were angry, and Vermont offered to show him what happens to people who hurt Lucia. Vermont explained that she doesn't know how to transform on her own yet, so he has to constantly maintain the transformation spell. But for some unknown reason, she turns back. If it happens in public, it won't be a problem. Abelard offered to help Lou and Stella turn human. That day there was a real stir. The Duke and his wife made their first public appearance in a long time, and they also showed off their beautiful daughter. The Duke's family, which had been silently protecting the northern borders, gave a truly lavish reception. There was also a quarrel with the imperial family. Now it is up to the upper class to take sides. Vermont tells her father that the prince saw Lucia in animal form. Luckily, Peyrin was passing by and helped her. He also promised to help her learn how to turn human. His father didn't like that, so he decided it was time to send word to Mohiant. After the banquet, Lucia was determined to learn to walk. As soon as the servants heard about it, They arranged everything so that she would not hurt herself wherever she fell. His father entered the room, informing Hikon that they would be leaving soon. Peyrin was waiting for them. The little girl thought about it. Agris is sure that the Pope wants to take the throne, and now the relationship between them is finally ruined, and here he is openly going to meet with the commander of the knights himself. So the father wants political attention. When he arrived at the palace, a servant informed him that Sir Abelard was absent. Father was surprised that such a grumpy man had friends. A boy came out to them, asking what was going on here. The guests were puzzled. The boy looked very much like Abelard. The boy greeted the guests and introduced himself as Duke Abelard's cousin, Ian. The little girl wondered at their resemblance. If he too was a divine beast, her father asked if they could wait for Peyrin here. Ian led them into the room and asked if they were here on this business. The father answered in the affirmative. The boy added that, at Sir Abelode's request, he would speak only to the young duchess. And they left the little girl with the young teacher. Ian asked Lucia if she could become a fox. She waved negatively. So she couldn't become a man or a beast herself. He apologized and touched her forehead with his finger. By casting the spell, he concluded that she was a special species, the existence of which would lead to disaster. The little one tensed up. Long ago, divine beasts joined forces to prevent an impending catastrophe. All the inhabitants of the continent have known about it since they were small children. Divine beasts are born from the fragments of the Creator God's soul. Of course, this rarely happens, but sometimes the piece that breaks off is bigger than the rest. That's when the special kind comes in. Such beasts stand closest to God. However, it is difficult to control such a huge force, and eventually it bursts out, resulting in a global catastrophe. The little girl trembled. Ian apologized to the young duchess and took her in his arms. She didn't want the people she cared most about to get hurt. The boy offered to show her something. They went out into the garden and he covered her eyes with his hand. Opening them, she was surprised that nothing had changed. As suddenly she noticed pink butterflies, they were worried, saying that Lucia had been caught. What should they do? The boy explained that they were spirits. They noticed that she could see them and headed towards her. Lucia was surprised, for she had been told that the divine beasts had lost contact with the spirits after the catastrophe. The spirits were running away from Ian. Ian told the little girl to wait for her at the fountain. She kept wondering if he was a special kind too, but why was he scared and she wasn't? The spirits spoke to Lucia. They asked if they were beautiful and offered her to touch herself. She touched a butterfly as suddenly the butterfly turned into a vixen. They played with her. Some turned into birds. Fish tickled her. Pleased with the girl's smile, Lucia could not resist and almost fell into the water, but the spirits supported her. To calm the child, the spirits decided to sing. It was the same tune that played every time she was in danger. She was bailed out by the spirits even when she was reborn. Ian went over to pick her up. The spirits murmured, saying he was a bad man. The boy said there was a bishop here, best not to cross him. The girl didn't understand. The bishop had an impeccable reputation. Ian even dressed like a novice, and perfume everywhere. A melody played, and a bright light flashed. The spirits tried to save Lucia. There were many times more of them. Lightning struck, and they started circling the tower. The story returns to the trial of the harbinger of disaster. Lenore steps in, saying that whatever it is, you can't kill a newborn. He hasn't done anything yet. He won't let it happen. Everyone argued for a long time, but in the end, Peyrin was saved. He had to wear a collar that forbade him to use his divine powers. The elders pretend to be merciful, but they're really just a bunch of scum. Their skin is more important to them than other people's lives, Lenore thought. Now he remembered why he had left the council. Peyrin is still very young. In human form, he should be a teenager, but with his powers, he can transform into an adult. However, when the magic is unstable, he returns to his usual guise to recover. Hikon noticed that Peyrin still seemed to be out of his mind. Father contacted Mahiant and said that Peyrin had asked if the man could be brought back to life. When he came to the forest, he asked the elders for help right in front of everyone. That's where the rumors about him going crazy came from. Hikon got nervous, asking if his father was sure he could trust Lushu. The father replied that he wouldn't hurt the child. When they opened the door, they saw the bishop accompanied by knights, which they were clearly not happy about. Father begged their pardon, but they were here on other business, to which His Eminence replied that he knew that was why he had come, for they would never have looked in on him. He pissed Lenore off. It was hard for him to explain, but it felt as if he had somehow guessed that Lenore was a divine beast. The bishop called the Duke in for a word. He said that there had been a terrible fire in the house of the Marquis of Azarel, and that Lenore was suspected of setting it. Father was surprised, the bishop continued. Only the room of the Marquise and the Marquess burned. They say it was not without magic. In addition, during the banquet, the Marquise behaved rudely towards his wife. Rumor has it that Lenore was the one who hired the tower keeper to do it. Lenore laughed, saying that if the tower keeper himself had listened to him, he would have achieved independence for the duchy long ago. I thought to myself, I think they've been figured out. That day, Vermont decided to wipe the Marquis family off the face of the empire. But Lenore had promised Syria that there would be no trouble, telling his son lastly that it was impossible for the Marquis and Marquess to die on his daughter's birthday. In the end, they compromised and decided to just burn down their house. Lenore has no idea who could have done it. The clergyman continued, saying that not long ago the bishop had gone to the Creator. Since then, strange things had begun to happen. He hoped that his lordship would refrain from senseless killing. Waving the bishop's hand away, the Duke replied that only if His Eminence showed him the right way. The bishop cast a menacing glance. Afterwards, cheerful, he casually asked to be introduced to the young duchess. The father replied that she was just a little girl, afraid of strangers. The bishop, as if not hearing, looked in the direction of the house, looking for the girl. The father was very annoyed, wondering why this old fox wanted his daughter, as suddenly they saw a flash of light and lightning that destroyed the sacred tower. The bishop lost consciousness. The father didn't understand what had happened. He and his son were worried if it was a matter of Lucia's powers. The spirits bragged to the girl about their powers. Lucia tried to stop them, but they didn't even listen to her. Ian summoned other spirits, and they immediately swallowed the pranksters. Everything went quiet. The boy said, there it was, the power of the special kind, their burden. Lucia now had an idea of what could happen if it got out of control. An incredibly powerful force that is impossible to resist. If she doesn't learn to control it, things could get much worse. Gasping, the boy fell to the ground, saying not to trust anyone. He grabbed his neck and she saw the seal and scratches. Ian forbade her to go near him. The boy was squirming in pain. Lucia could not leave him with his neck torn to blood. She tried to help him, and suddenly he saw Princess Ianelle in front of him and called her by name. Dad and his brother came running, and his father took the little girl in his arms. He couldn't believe her power was out of control. Then something would have to be done. Lucia fell asleep. In her dream, she thought that she and Ian belonged to a special species and could see spirits and use their power. And what's that weird tattoo like it's holding Ian back, hurting him when he uses the Force? She worried that she would face the same fate if she didn't learn to control the spirits. She felt sorry that he was suffering for her. She wondered why he called her Ianelle. Had they met in a past life? No, she would remember. By the way, she had come here to learn how to turn human after all, but no progress so far. The next time they met, she would be sure to ask him. The bishop reported what had happened to Basila. They discussed secret matters, and Basila ordered him to keep an eye on the young duchess. Big changes were coming, and they didn't want any trouble. On his knees, the bishop assured them that everything would be taken care of, calling Vasila Overlord. It's been a month now, and all this time Lucia has been cared for by her family. They brought her to her room after she fainted and never left her side for a minute. It was as if they looked at her differently. In her previous life, when she was sick, the servants had taken good care of her. They were close, but they weren't her family. Her father never had time to even visit her. Even though she was cared for, she felt so lonely. Now she's not alone, but they're overreacting. 2 days later. Sitting on her brother's lap, Hikan reassured her as he thought Lucia was worried about the upcoming ceremony. Suddenly, Vermont fell on their heads. When he saw Lucia, he deftly took her away from his brother, inviting him to a picnic. They knew nothing about picnics, and Lucia watched in surprise, wondering if her brothers had never been to a picnic. Vermont suggested they go to one of the popular places and just follow the others. Hikan offered to stock up on food for the week and asked if it would be enough. His brother kicked him, and Hikan went to get lunch. Babe exhaled. At least Vermont was behaving appropriately, and he suddenly said he hoped his brother wouldn't forget the couch. After much trial and error, they moved on their way. The little girl asked her brothers to look around, and they waved approvingly. Without the baby, they don't even have anything to talk about. Hikan noticed that they were like elderly parents who didn't want their children to grow up. The little girl was studying the park. It was beautiful. Everything was tastefully done, quite lively. Suddenly, she bumped into a boy. She fell. The boy held out his hand and apologized and asked if she was hurt. The little girl answered in the negative and smiled sweetly. The boy was blown away by her smile. Taking her hand, completely serious, he shouted a marriage proposal. Hearing this, Vermont dropped the basket. Hikan ripped up the plaid. Apparently, the brothers weren't thrilled with their sister's new friend. Due to the torn plaid, they had to team up with children and an elderly woman. The adults were extremely uncomfortable. The boy introduced himself. His name is Ilix, and this is his twin sister, and asked what the little girl's name was. The girl introduced herself as Lucia, hesitated, and corrected it to Lucia. Ilix remarked what a lovely name she had. He's smart. He pretends not to notice the way those two are looking at him. He'll go far. His sister, on the other hand, seems nice and modest. She opened the box and offered Lucia a treat. Until this day, Lucia had never socialized with her peers in her previous life or in this one. Her father had always been overprotective, so she was only allowed to socialize with the maids. Lucia was excited about the new acquaintance. It was quite fun. The brothers tolerated it as best they could. Suddenly, a boy ran up with a bucket of earth and scattered it on their food. He shouted happily that everything was now appropriate to their situation. Lucia shouted furiously for him to apologize. Apologize now! Came over and ruined their picnic. He thinks he can behave like that because of the difference in status. The girl wondered if the future of Rochim's empire was so bleak. Hikan pulled a bottle out of the basket. When he saw that Lucia had noticed his intentions, he awkwardly held the bottle up to him and smiled. Vermont's face flamed with a thirst for revenge. Lucia was tearing up trying to distract them. We can't let rumors spread that a fight broke out in the park because of the young duchess. The bully shouted that she was a coward, hiding behind the adults, to which the brothers replied that he had a chance to get away unharmed, but now, one word from Lucia and they would kill him. The bully and the gang rushed away. Lucia comforted her friend, but the outraged ladies came up to them and started yelling at the little girl. Only the emperor's family is higher than the Eleron family. They recognized Lucia, so they apologized and immediately left. The boy was very upset. He just wanted to spend time with his fiancée. Lucia said it was too early for her to be a bride, but they could still be friends. Seaside Empire, the city of Balain. Praising the beauty of the area, saying it is thanks to his friend, Lenore greets the hiding Mohiant. The father explained that Lucia's birthday ceremony was coming up, and it seemed that his daughter belonged to a special species, and he wouldn't want anyone to know about it. All divine beasts remember Perrin's story. Lanner will not stand by while his daughter is mocked, and that's why he needs Mohiant's help. He agreed, saying he would open the vault for Lenore to take what he needed to contain her power. Lanner replied that he didn't need it. Syria was already in the vault and would take what she needed. Mohiant asked if they would have robbed his vault if he hadn't agreed. My father replied that he had authorized it.